The low hum of conversation filled the Onyx Cut, a high-end steakhouse nestled in the heart of New York City. The air was thick with the rich aroma of seared beef and aged oak. Dim, atmospheric lighting glinted off polished silverware and crystal glasses, casting long shadows across tables where deals were closed and anniversaries celebrated. In a secluded leather booth, Jason Statham sat alone, a picture of focused calm amidst the sophisticated chaos. At 55, his presence was magnetic. He wore a dark gray, form-fitting Henley shirt under a tailored casual blazer, a choice that did little to hide the powerful, compact physique of a man who treated his body like a weapon. Before him sat a perfectly cooked ribeye steak and a glass of single malt whiskey, its amber liquid catching the light. He wasn't just eating, he was observing. His sharp, intelligent eyes scanned the room with a practiced, almost predatory stillness, a habit from a life lived on the edge, one that never truly faded. His friend, caught in a last-minute business call, was running late, but Jason didn't mind the solitude. It gave him time to think. Across the room, at the crowded bar, a different kind of energy was brewing. Chet Vance, a finance bro in his early 30s, held court with a group of fawning junior analysts. Flashing a gaudy gold watch, he bragged loudly about his weekend Brazilian jiu-jitsu classes, his voice cutting through the restaurant's refined ambience. The guy tapped out in under a minute, Chet boasted, his laughter sharp and arrogant. Some guys just don't have the killer instinct, you know? His colleagues offered weak, sycophantic chuckles. Then, Chet's gaze drifted across the room and landed on Jason. He saw an older man, alone, sitting with an air of quiet confidence that Chet found infuriating. It was a confidence Chet tried to buy with expensive suits and loud stories, but could never truly own. It felt like a challenge. He needed a target to reaffirm his dominance in front of his audience. "Check out that old-timer," Chet sneered to his friends, nudging one of them. "Thinks he's some kind of movie tough guy, but I could fold him in half." One of his friends shifted nervously. "I don't know, Chet. Let's just get another round." But the warning was lost in a haze of ego and expensive whiskey. Chet slid off his bar stool, a cruel smirk playing on his lips, and swaggered toward Jason's booth. He arrived at the table and rapped his knuckles sharply on the dark wood, the sound like a gunshot in the immediate vicinity. "Hey, Pops," Chet began, his tone dripping with condescension. "Rough day? You look like you could use some company. Or are you too good to talk to anyone?" Jason slowly lifted his gaze from his plate. His eyes, cold and analytical, met Chet's. There was no anger, no surprise, just a flat, unnerving assessment. "I'm trying to have a peaceful meal," Jason said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. The simple, direct dismissal only fueled Chet's arrogance. He let out a short, mocking laugh that turned a few heads at nearby tables. "Peaceful meal?" he echoed, leaning in closer, invading Jason's personal space. "This is New York City, old man. There's no peace here. Maybe you should learn some manners." Jason placed his knife and fork down deliberately, the silver making a soft click against the porcelain plate. His movements were economical, precise. "This is your only warning," he stated, his voice dropping even lower, yet carrying an undeniable weight of finality. "Walk away." For a fleeting second, the absolute certainty in Jason's tone gave Chet pause. But the eyes of his colleagues were on him, and his pride was a roaring fire. He couldn't back down now. "Or what?" he spat, his face contorting into an ugly sneer. "You gonna bore me to death with stories from the good old days?" With that, Chet shoved Jason's shoulder hard. It was a move meant to rock him back, to assert physical dominance. But it was like shoving a granite statue. Jason didn't move a single inch. His frame absorbed the impact without the slightest hint of give, his core locked and immovable. The only thing that moved were his eyes, which narrowed into icy slits. "You chose poorly," Jason said, the words barely a whisper. Chet, emboldened by what he mistook for inaction, decided to end it. He balled his right hand into a fist and swung a clumsy telegraph hook aimed at Jason's head. What happened next was a blur of motion so fast, so brutally efficient, it defied belief. Jason didn't block the punch in a conventional way. Instead, his left arm shot up, not to stop the fist, but to meet the incoming arm. With a swift, fluid parry, he deflected the blow. In the same seamless movement, his right elbow rose and jabbed downwards with surgical precision, striking a nerve cluster on Chet's bicep. A white-hot shock of pain and electricity shot through Chet's arm. His muscles went completely dead, his fist unclenching involuntarily. His entire arm hung limp and useless at his side. A gasp escaped his lips, his mind struggling to process the sudden, total paralysis. Before he could even register the pain, Jason's hand clamped around his wrist. With a subtle twist and a shift of leverage, Jason applied a small, excruciatingly painful joint lock. Chet's body was forced to follow the pressure. His knees buckled, and he found himself collapsing onto one knee beside the table, his face a mask of shock and agony. The entire sequence had taken less than 2 seconds. The restaurant fell silent. Diners stared, forks frozen halfway to their mouths. The soft glow of several smartphone screens suddenly illuminated the scene as people began to record. Jason leaned forward slightly, his voice a cold, private threat meant only for Chet. "I told you to walk away. Now you're going to get up, you're going to leave my table, and you're going to consider this a gift." He released his grip. The pain vanished, but the tingling numbness in Chet's arm and the burning humiliation remained. Chet scrambled to his feet, his mind reeling. The physical pain was already subsiding, replaced by a tidal wave of pure, unadulterated humiliation. He had been neutralized, brought to his knees in front of the entire restaurant by an old man. His friends at the bar were staring, their expressions a mixture of shock and pity. The other diners were whispering, their phones still pointed at him. His carefully constructed facade of a tough, dominant alpha had been shattered into a million pieces. Reason fled. All that was left was a raw, desperate need to reclaim his honor, no matter the cost. His wild eyes darted around, searching for a solution, an equalizer. They landed on an empty table next to his own, where the place setting was still immaculate. He saw it. A steak knife, its serrated edge gleaming under the soft lights. In a single, reckless motion, he lunged for the empty table and snatched the knife. He spun back around to face Jason, his knuckles white as he gripped the handle. "You think you're so tough?" he snarled, his voice cracking with rage. "Let's see you handle this." The atmosphere in the Onyx Cut changed instantly. The low hum of chatter died completely, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. A woman gasped. The clatter of a dropped fork echoed through the room. This was no longer a barroom scuffle. It had escalated into something far more dangerous. The glint of steel had introduced the very real possibility of bloodshed. Jason, however, remained unervingly calm. He watched Chet with the same focused intensity, his eyes tracking the knife, assessing the angle, the grip, the trembling in Chet's hand. Slowly, deliberately, he rose from his seat, unfolding to his full height. He didn't rush. Every movement was controlled, radiating a confidence that was the polar opposite of Chet's panicked aggression. He shrugged off his blazer, folding it neatly and placing it over the back of the booth's leather seat. The simple action was mesmerizing. It was a declaration. He was getting ready for work. The Henley shirt clung to a physique that was all dense muscle and coiled power. He took a single step forward, out of the confines of the booth, planting his feet firmly on the floor. His gaze never left Chet, but his voice, when he spoke, was loud enough for the entire room to hear. It was calm, steady, and filled with a chilling sense of pity. "Son," Jason said, the word hanging in the silent air. "You really don't want to do this." Chet was beyond listening. Fueled by a toxic cocktail of shame and adrenaline, he let out a guttural yell and lunged forward, thrusting the steak knife in a clumsy, downward arc aimed at Jason's chest. It was the desperate, predictable attack of an amateur. For Jason, time seemed to slow down. He saw every detail, the wild look in Chet's eyes, the overcommitment of his shoulders, the flawed angle of the blade. He didn't retreat. A professional never gives ground unless it's a strategic choice. Instead, he exploded forward. In a movement almost too quick for the eye to follow, he stepped inside the arc of the attack. His left hand shot out, not to grab the wrist, but to form a firm V shape that deflected Chet's forearm, sending the knife trajectory harmlessly past his side. Simultaneously, his right hand, open and rigid, struck upwards. The heel of his palm connected squarely with Chet's chin. Crack! The impact was brutal. Chet's head snapped back, his teeth clacking together with an audible sound. A spray of saliva flew from his mouth. His vision swam in a sea of black spots, his brain rattling inside his skull from the concussive force. The world dissolved into a dizzying, nauseating blur. For a critical half-second, his entire nervous system was in shock, his body momentarily paralyzed. That was all the time Jason needed. As Chet's body went limp, his grip on the knife loosened. Jason's left hand, which had deflected the attack, slid down and clamped onto Chet's wrist. With a sharp, practiced twist, he bent the wrist back at an unnatural angle. A choked cry of pain escaped Chet's lips as his fingers spasmed open, the steak knife clattering onto the polished floor. But Jason wasn't finished. Maintaining his grip, he spun Chet around, using his own momentum against him. He wrenched Chet's arm high up his back and slammed him forward, face first, onto the very table he had been trying to defend. Plates and glasses rattled violently, one tipping over and spilling ice water across the white tablecloth. Chet's cheek was pressed hard against the wood, the fight completely drained from him, leaving only pain and abject terror. Jason held him there effortlessly. He glanced down at the fallen knife, then back at the stunned, silent audience of diners. He was in complete control. He leaned down, his voice calm and clear, a professor delivering a lecture. Lesson 1, he announced to the room. Never bring a weapon to a fight unless you're prepared to have it used against you. He then looked down at the whimpering man pinned beneath him. And you, he added in a low growl, are not prepared. He released Chet with a dismissive shove. Chet stumbled back, clutching his arm, his face a mess of tears and humiliation. He stared at Jason, his eyes wide with the terrifying realization that he had picked a fight with something not quite human. Without another word, he turned and practically fled the restaurant, his friends scrambling from the bar to follow him out into the night. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a single person began to clap. Soon, the entire restaurant joined in, a wave of applause and relieved chatter washing over the room. The applause slowly died down, replaced by an excited, nervous buzz. The staff rushed to clean up the mess as diners spoke in hushed, animated tones, replaying the incredible scene they had just witnessed. Jason calmly picked up the fallen steak knife, wiped it with a napkin, and placed it back on the empty table. He retrieved his blazer, sat back down in his booth, and took a sip of his whiskey as if nothing had happened. But his eyes, sharp and ever watchful, remained fixed on the restaurant's glass entrance. He knew men like Chet. Their pride was a fragile, dangerous thing. A public humiliation like this wouldn't be the end. It was merely the intermission. 20 minutes later, he was proven right. The restaurant door burst open with such force that it slammed against the wall, the bang silencing every conversation. Chet was back, and he wasn't alone. Flanking him were 3 other men, each one radiating a distinct aura of menace. One was a mountain of muscle with the thick neck and broad shoulders of a former college football player. Another was wiry and lean, bouncing on the balls of his feet like a caged boxer, his knuckles scarred. The third, and most imposing, was a heavy-set man with a shaved head and dead, emotionless eyes that suggested he was no stranger to violence. "There he is," Chet yelled, his voice raw with fury, pointing a trembling finger at Jason's booth. "That's the guy." The remaining diners gasped. Some scrambled to get away from the impending chaos, while others, emboldened by the first encounter, raised their phones again, ready to capture the sequel. Jason took a slow, deliberate breath and pushed himself to his feet. He didn't wait for them to surround him. He was the predator, not the prey. He moved to meet them in the open space between the tables. The boxer was the first to advance. "You got a problem with my friend, old man?" he sneered, feinting with a quick jab. Jason didn't answer with words. As the boxer threw a real punch, Jason moved. He kicked a heavy oak chair into the man's path, forcing him to stumble. In that split second of imbalance, Jason closed the distance. He parried the punch, grabbed the man's extended arm, and used it as a lever, spinning him around and slamming an elbow into the back of his neck. The boxer collapsed, his face hitting the floor with a sickening thud. The football player let out a roar and charged, intending to tackle Jason and crush him with sheer size and power. It was a foolish move. Jason sidestepped the clumsy charge, his foot hooking behind the man's ankle. As the giant stumbled, Jason delivered a brutal, short-range chop to his throat, followed by a knee to the ribs. The big man wheezed, clutching his throat, and crashed into the bar, sending bottles of expensive liquor shattering to the ground. Now only the heavy-set man with the dead eyes remained standing, apart from a terrified Chet. He moved with a surprising quickness, pulling a bottle from a nearby table and swinging it at Jason's head. Jason raised his forearm to block the blow, the glass shattering on impact, but his arm holding firm. He absorbed the pain without flinching and retaliated with a blindingly fast 3-punch combination. 2 quick jabs to the face to disrupt his vision, followed by a powerful right cross to the jaw. The man's head snapped to the side, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious before he landed. The entire fight had lasted less than 30 seconds. It was a whirlwind of violent, devastating efficiency. The restaurant was in a state of stunned, absolute silence. 3 men lay groaning or unconscious on the floor amidst shattered glass and overturned furniture. Chet Vance stood alone, frozen in place, his face pale with terror. The drunken rage that had fueled his return had evaporated, replaced by the cold, stark reality of his catastrophic misjudgment. He was staring at a man who had just dismantled his entire backup plan with the casual efficiency of a butcher breaking down a side of beef. Jason walked slowly toward him, his footsteps the only sound in the cavernous room. He stopped directly in front of Chet, his shadow engulfing the younger man. He wasn't even breathing heavily. He reached out, not to strike, but to calmly straighten the collar of Chet's designer shirt. The gesture was strangely intimate and utterly terrifying. He leaned in close, his voice a low, menacing growl that was for Chet alone. "Respect," he said, the word cutting through the silence. "It's not given. It's earned. Tonight, you earn nothing." He held Chet's terrified gaze for a long moment, letting the weight of his failure sink in. Then, he simply stepped back, dismissing him as if he were nothing more than a piece of trash to be ignored. That was the final blow. Broken and defeated, Chet stumbled backward, nearly tripping over one of his fallen friends. He turned and fled the restaurant for the last time, a pathetic figure disappearing into the New York night. His friends, one by one, painfully picked themselves up and staggered out after him, a trail of shame and failure in their wake. As the door swung shut, the silence was broken by a single, thunderous sound. Applause. It was louder this time, unrestrained. Diners were on their feet, cheering, whistling. The adrenaline in the room was palpable. Mia, the young waitress who had been serving his table, approached him, her eyes wide with awe. "Sir, I've never seen anything like that," she stammered. Jason offered her the ghost of a smile. He walked back to his booth, picked up his blazer, and pulled a crisp $100 bill from his wallet, placing it on the table. "For the damages," he said softly. Then he turned and walked out into the night, melting back into the city's shadows as quietly as he had appeared. Within minutes, the videos started to hit the internet. Multiple angles, shaky footage, all telling the same incredible story. Titles popped up on YouTube, TikTok, and X. Finance bro tries to fight Jason Statham, instantly regrets it, and legendary action star teaches bullies a lesson in NYC steakhouse. The clips went viral, amassing millions of views within hours. The incident sparked a firestorm of online debate. Was the level of force justified? But the overwhelming sentiment was one of admiration for the quiet professional who had been pushed too far. The story became a modern-day fable, a cautionary tale for a generation that often confused arrogance with strength. It served as a stark reminder: never, ever judge a man by his age or his quiet demeanor. You simply never know who you're dealing with. What do you think? Was his response justified? Share your thoughts below. Let's have a meaningful discussion. And please, always comment respect. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.